Hi, everyone. For those of you who have watched the English Embankment tours with me, this will be very familiar because this is the English Embankment. I don't have a video of a walk connecting us from the English Embankment to the English Avenue, but we have Google Maps, which I don't think is a big deal to use. And the previous English Embankment episodes, I think we have done six of them. Well, they are all available as a recording on my secret YouTube playlist, available for my sponsors. And if you want to get access to about 900, if you would like to have an access to about 900 videos, there is a way to do that. It's called like become a member, and the link is also on the chat. Well, this is the English embankment of the Neva River, and it's some of the most splendid palaces that belong to English merchants, hence the name of the embankment, right? And also Russian merchants, and also a lot of embassies uh, uh, used to be housed in this embankment. It's the one of the most expensive areas to be in. For example, this is the palace of Baron Stiglitz, right? Who was one of the richest men of the country, and he was a big patron of arts. He established the Academy of Applied Arts, even, and he's remembered in the city. So this is one of the most splendid palaces that we have seen on the embankment. But the English embankment got its name also because of the English specialists that came to the city almost immediately after it was established. You remember 18th century, Peter the Great built the city, and one of the fundamental industries, I would say, the industries that shaped the face of the city and even the empire, and this for the many years to come, it was shipbuilding. So the first and the main industry was shipbuilding. So to the right hand side so if you remember the embankment, so the embankment actually started with the shipbuilding yard called Admiralty, and because of that, many English specialists in shipbuilding and engineers also settled there. And then merchants, because the main trade would be done obviously along the Gulf of Finland and the Neva River. If you continue straight ahead, sailing straight ahead along the Neva River, you will find yourself in the Gulf of Finland in like 15 minutes. So that's a big deal. Further on, the old shipbuilding yard became a little bit obsolete and just not big enough. So where we are now standing, before we turn left, there will be another island separated from this one by a canal. And this happens to be the modern shipbuilding yard over there. So exactly behind the trees. But that area is inaccessible and no one can access it but the workers of the shipbuilding yard. And this is one of the areas where the ships, not the military, just, I would say passenger fleet and the small trade ships are built. But we need to go on, so we are quickly passing by. Thank you, Google, for being that helpful. We are now passing that avenue and we're stopping like halfway through because on this very bridge, which is actually the yellow bridge, if we look to the left, we see the New Holland Island, right? This is the tour that's, the last tour of the English embankment. We wrapped up with this New Holland Island because this area happened to be one of the storages, it was the island where the building material, the wood and everything else for the shipbuilding was stored in the 18th and even in the 19th century. So, and again, this was the area where a lot of workers of the shipbuilding yard used to live, including the Englishmen. And now we are on our way. So this is the New Holland Island. I'm kind of showing to you from a distance from the opposite side of the Moika River. And now we need to proceed we have crossed already a couple of islands, as you can see. And now we're going along the Moika River embankment. And you can see there are a lot of industrial buildings there because this is exactly that island that is occupied by the big shipbuilding yard. So you are in the heart of the city. but you get to see this very industrial view, which is which is big part of how things are. However, we will be coming back to this area because to the left is something absolutely different, strikingly magnificent. But I need to take it to the English Avenue. So basically, some 5 minutes walk from where we have just been by the English Embankment, right? There is the English Avenue, and this is the logically, well, the continuation of the subject all around the Englishman living in St. Petersburg. So the English Avenue is also one of those expensive streets, a little bit quieter area that was developed slightly later, like closer to the, well, kind of second half of the, okay, some buildings started to emerge there in the second half of the 18th century, but mostly it's the 19th century. And yeah, so the English Avenue or Angliyskiy Prospekt, so this is the Russian name of it. And even just by looking at the beginning of the avenue, you can kind of have an idea of what kind of people must have lived in these buildings. All sorts of merchants and even politicians and ambassadors. So, and it's one of the my favorite areas in the city. Uh, well, I'm a tour guide, so I must have said it often that this and that is my favorite part of the city. But the area where we are now, it's called Kolomna. It's some of the quietest areas in the city, and Angliyskiy Avenue is probably the loudest of the of all the streets in this quiet neighborhood. It's quiet, it's interesting, and it hasn't really been touched by the time. Hasn't really. It still looks very much the same. Yeah, and just to kind of help you, I know that having maps is also a good idea. This map is in Russian, but what I want you to look at, I know I don't have the pointer, but it's also not a big deal. You see the thick straight line. This is exactly the English Avenue, and you see it actually crosses the one river, so it occupies two islands. And again, the river to the left is the Moika River, then the river, the canal in the middle that it crosses, not far from the beer house staff, it's the Griboyedov Canal, one of the first, and actually the first artificial canal in the city. Dug during the times of Catherine the Great, that is the 18th century, and the English Avenue finishes by the Fontanka River embankment. And this name must ring a bell to you. Well, if you and most of you have done the well either live boat trips with me, well canal cruises, or the ones that I have done over the course of this couple of years that I'm not living in St. Petersburg. So this is a long avenue. There's quite a lot to talk about. A lot of people from well merchants and royals to I would say workers. There's a lot to talk about. The interesting thing is that during the Soviet period, obviously the country could not be called after, well, the avenue could not be called after some capitalist country. No, it could not have been called English Avenue, but to kind of still have this connection with England, the avenue was called after John Maclean, who was the the leader and one of the founders of the British Socialist Party. That's an interesting character. And yeah, so we used to have Prospekt Maklina. I think that's how it used to be called in Russian, but it's in the Soviet period. Before that, during the imperial times and also in the post-perestroika period, that's the area is called English Avenue. So that's it. And I would say that maybe nowadays it has a less connection with the British, with the English, but it still has this very royal vibe, mainly due to some Grand Dukes Romanovs that lived in this area. Anyway, so this is the Moika River embankment, the beginning of it. So on the opposite side, this is the shipbuilding island, right? The kind of the new shipbuilding yard. And we need to turn to the left. And yeah, so over there, this is exactly the English Avenue. That's how it starts. And uh, when Misha filmed it for me, he didn't feel everything. Yes, you did not. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I also I'm going to need to use some Google Maps just because I want to show you as much as possible. But it's okay. I mean, it's totally fine. And the building to the right hand side, this is the first building on the avenue. It looks lovely, right? So this is clearly not the early 19th century, so the late 19th century architecture. And because this we are very close to the modern shipbuilding yard that started to be developed in the second half of the 19th century because the why well because the old admiralty was not big enough, and in mid 19th century the shipbuilding technologies changed dramatically and they switched from the wooden shipbuilding to metal ships, so they needed more space, they needed more people, and the people who worked for the shipbuilding guard needed a place to live, and many would be housed not far. So this building was intended to house the engineers for the shipbuilding guard. And I think obviously it wasn't just an average worker, but it was what those were engineers. They were provided the place to live for themselves and for their families. And right now, this building houses a research facility that's dealing with research of the world ocean. Well, clearly at the end of 19th century, very eclectic building. And as you know, whenever I can, I share with you photos of the interiors or what have survived. This is since it's a research facility and, this building went through the Soviet period, obviously. So there's not so much left, but some fireplaces, the original fireplaces, have survived and some other elements of the interior. So just one photo I have been able to find. And to the left hand side, yeah, I mean, it looks really weird. Looks very industrial, and in a way it is, but it's really hard to believe. But these buildings, well, they used to be part of the big complex of buildings that belonged to Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich, who had his enormous palace exactly there. Enormous. We're going to explore it, so don't worry. It's kind of a little bit of a surprise because technically speaking, it's not the English Avenue, but it's the Moika River embankment. But well, I could not but share this story with you. So whenever I can, I talk about the Romanovs. So Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich, he was the fourth son of Alexander II, well, that emperor who ruled from 1855 to 1881, the one who liberated the Serbs and was killed by terrorists. So he had a lot of children, and one of them was Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich, who was appointed the patron because he was always fascinated with the water and the navigation. He was appointed the patron and the chef of the admiralty of the fleet, and he was, by the way, the very last admiral and naval general admiral of the Russian fleet, because this position would be eliminated afterwards. And yeah, it sounds really amazing and lovely and wow, but this man had an interesting life. Well, first and foremost, I must have shared it that he, apart from being involved with all the, activity related to the fleet and the navigation and the shipbuilding, he oversaw all of this. Imagine this man must have been super busy. However, he was sent to the States as the goodwill ambassador. It was one of the first, well, actually was the first visit of a Romanov to the US. And when he arrived on his favorite ship, Svetlana, he was he was treated as a king. He was just a grand duke, but the Americans made sure he would be given the best treatment, and uh, they were so hospitable that they even took him on a buffalo hunting with Buffalo Bill. There are a lot of illustrations that were well, all over the American press. That's him also on one of the hunts with a dog, as far as I'm not mistaken, and he joined his visit. It was basically several weeks of the hunting nonstop, partying nonstop, and meeting American politicians. So, and every step of his was documented, photographed, and then also shared on the press. It was shared with the press. So there was a well, a big gala parties everywhere he went to. So that was, I would say, um, one of the most important events in the in okay 19th century political life, international political life in Russia. Yeah, it wasn't even political, but that was kind of making rapport between the two countries. And he succeeded because he was very good at that. He was very good at talking, and he was absolutely exceptional when it got to women. He was a womanizer, and he took a lot of trips. He traveled around the world, and every time he traveled, he would be with a new woman. He had a bit weakness for had a weakness for ballerinas, like many Romanovs, and we will be talking about another ballerina on the English Avenue, but next time. Second episode is already scheduled for next Saturday. I had to tweak a few things to make sure I don't overlap with my colleagues and all, but same time. And you may remember that on the English embankment, we visited a palace that belonged to the Lichtenberg family. And there was a Duchess of Lichtenberg, Zinaida Skobeleva, Zinaida Duchess of Lichtenberg. So, uh, Grand Duke was also her lover, while her husband was alive, in a sound mind and a healthy body. And Zinaida kept seeing Alexei Alexandrovich while being married and happily married. That's what she mentioned. So it was an interesting um, menage a trois. And yeah, and the world knew about it. So everyone knew about it. And this is the palace that he built for himself. Imagine it was, it's exactly that building that overlooked this new shipbuilding yard. He built this palace for himself because he wanted to live as close as possible to the place that he was in charge of. And now I'm taking the Google Maps again to take it to that place. So this is the Moika River embankment, the ugly industrial side of things. And you see this fence. So this is actually the territory of that palace. This beautiful gate, the beautiful fence. So that's exactly. And that you saw also the yellow bridge, that yellow bridge we crossed. And so this fence, it actually the fence of the palace. Imagine, just imagine, right? So as I said, it may look quite unexpected because on the one hand, you see the shipbuilding yard that looks industrial, ugly, and well, it's hard to imagine you are in the heart of St. Petersburg. But on the opposite bank of the Moika River, you see this glorious palace, which still looks amazing. It's not a palace anymore. Actually, this is a concert hall. But wow, we have a lot of photographs, and we can even walk a little bit on the territory. But let's just see what we have. And I have little videos that I filmed many years ago, and also I have photographs from the archives. Nevertheless, so this is the palace. And technically speaking, this is the Moika River embankment, but to the right-hand side from here, the English Avenue begins. And that's why I thought it would be actually a good idea to show it to you. So this space is open for visits only when the concerts are on. And well, there are very, very few tours actually held. And there are also multiple other buildings that you can find on the territory. And they, not all of them belong to the concert hall. Well, this one, for example, in the Soviet times, this building, it was built in the Soviet times, by the way, early Soviet times. It was built for a kindergarten. And I have some photographs that I will show you later on. But the territory was huge. There was a big park. And where did the Grand Duke got the money for it? Because it was his private residence. Well, so he had a really bad reputation. He had a kind of a badass reputation. Apart from being a womanizer, he uh, allegedly, according to people who worked with him, to the courtiers and people who also reported to him, he may have taken several bribes, and whenever a new ship was supposed to be built in St. Petersburg or purchased for St. Petersburg, he always had his interest. And no company, no business could come to Russia without his interest being accounted for. Yep. And also part of the palace belongs to an educational facility. And exactly from there, you see a lot of students there, so you can approach, you can have a look at the building, but there's no entry, unfortunately. And I have never been inside, by the way, this particular part of the palace because I'm not a student of this educational facility. And this is the territory, well, it belongs to the park. I mean, it's the park that is now part of this educational facility, but in fact, this is the original fountain from the big garden of Alexei Alexandrovich. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely. And yes, we have never explored that area before, so I thought it would be a nice surprise to show you another royal palace. I mean, he was a grand duke. He was the son of an emperor, and we have some photographs. And now, seeing well, now that you know the story of his, I would say, not an impeccable reputation, you kind of have an idea where the money for this opulence would be coming from. There were also even more, I would say, outrageous stories, such as, well, he, before he became involved into these relationships with Zinaida Lichtenberg, he had an affair with a ballerina. It was during the times of the Russian-Japanese War, 1904, 1905, and Russia was losing, and Russia lost eventually. And it was mainly the war in the sea. And during that time, the ballerina that everyone knew was his mistress, was his lover, even though he had been, well, involved also with other women, but she was, well, he was absolutely mad about her. She went to the stage amidst the war wearing diamonds, like diamond necklace, earrings, a diadem, and someone from the uh, someone in the theater, some people from the audience exclaimed, "Oh, she's wearing one of the Russian ships on her in her ears." So people were absolutely outraged by the fact that Russian fleet is under-equipped. The ships are, well, they say they are very much below the standards, and this ballerina is wearing some of the really expensive diamonds. So there were a lot of money that kind of went missing, and it was none of this was proved, but I think everyone knows the story. I like this photo very much. Yeah, this is St. Petersburg in one of those snowstorms. Anyway, so this is the architectural masterpiece that kind of also gives you a certain vibe. It kind of sets the tone of the tour, and you have an idea what kind of people lived in this area. So on the one hand, yes, it's very industrial. On the other hand, oh no, definitely not. So This is the building. Photo was taken in the 1950s. This is the kindergarten. It was built. It is believed to have been built on the base of one of the buildings that used to be located on the territory of the palace of the Grand Duke. So, but I can't tell you what kind of building it was. I have no idea. The building next to it, uh, well, interesting. There's a bit of a mystery about the architect who built it. A little bit unclear when exactly the building was finished, but we know for whom it was built. The building was constructed in the second half of the 19th century for Isaac Malkiel, who was a Jewish merchant originally based in Moscow. And he was one of the richest people in the country. Isaac Malkiel was one of the founders and one of the big supporters of the Jewish community in Moscow. He was one of the sponsors for construction of the synagogue in Moscow, big choral synagogue. However, he wasn't. Well, he was among the sponsors, so to speak, and he had his fingers in many pies, like all the merchants used to. And he had also some business in St. Petersburg, and whenever he visited St. Petersburg, he stayed in this house. But unfortunately, there are no photographs. His sons continued the work of his father, and they remained in Moscow up until the revolution. Also during the pogrom periods, which is the end of the 19th century. They supported the Zionist groups. And Zionism is not a derogatory term, actually. It's just the process that was ignited by the pogroms and hostility towards Jews, which pushed them to go back to the ancestral homeland, that is the future land of Israel, right? So there's no politics here. It's just people trying to survive. So and the Malkiel family contributed a lot to that and saved a lot of Jews, by the way, in Moscow as well. Yes. So, but unfortunately, the building is not in the best condition. I am not even sure if there is, well, anything. I don't know who owns the building. I don't know what's going on there. And well, as far as I remember, this Google Maps footage is quite recent, so it's pretty much, I would say, accurate information. There's still not much going on, and that's the building on the postcard. Yeah, it looks a little bit sad. What can I say? But uh, well, however, most other buildings that we will see on the avenue look lovely and fresh restored. Well, another building, it kind of attached to Malkiel's house. At some point, it actually all the two buildings used to belong to Malkiel, but later on, the building to the right was purchased from Malkiel and belonged to another family. And well, with this house, at least we have an idea. We know who owned it. We know what was going on there. It was one of the tenant houses or income houses, which I'm sure you remember from my multiple tours. It belonged to a private entity or to a person or to a merchant, and people would be just renting apartments from in this house. And this is how all these buildings would be actually giving income to the investors, to the landowners. In the Soviet period, this house was given to the workers of the first. It was the Soviet Geographical Society. Margaret, thank you so much for your tips. Thank you, dear. And a certain Leo Berg, one of the professors, members of the Academy, of the Russian Geographical Society, used to have his office here in 1930s. So that's his office. It's just a photo I was able to find in the archives. Not much, unfortunately. And also a photo taken in one of the rooms. The fireplace is original. There are a lot of interesting items on the mantelpiece, but yeah, technically speaking, it's clearly not really functioning fireplace. And I don't know what's happening in the building nowadays. It must be um, it must be rented by some institution, maybe government institution. There are a lot of governmental institutions in this avenue. I guess it's very much clear why, because the Soviets originally had a good taste for architecture and they would occupy a lot of opulent uh, merchant houses, not necessarily Romanov buildings, not necessarily the buildings that belong to Grand Dukes. Well, there was enough of real estate for them. So, and historically, some institutions are still housed in some of these buildings. Another house that belonged to Alexander Pampel. Alexander Pampel was a merchant who specialized in sugar supplies. He owned several sugar refineries in the south of Russia. That's the only photo I have been able to find, unfortunately. And he built his house here, and the building is still here. Well, it used to be communal apartments in the Soviet times. Some photographs that I have been able to find, they date to the 2000, 2010s. Well, some fireplaces have survived, not in its best condition, and this is the photo from the communal kitchen. By the way, just last night, some of you I know were with me on the first tour of the year. We visited an apartment in the opulent house built in 1905, the Bach House. The recording is already on my YouTube channel, by the way. So, in the end, after exploring some lovely interiors of the big apartment, we also visited one of the communal apartments. So, this is kind of a little addition to our communal apartment experience. What you see is the old stove that probably hasn't been cleaned since 1917. And you see two stoves. That's because each family, which occupied one room within the apartment, would also have their own stove. Because how else would you know how much you need to pay for the stove? And yes, there are still about from 60 to 80,000 communal apartments in the city in the 21st century. But some people consider it very romantic as well. So I don't know. Maybe in a way there is certain vibe of the communal apartments. Now, one of the buildings that Misha did not film for us, it belonged to the Verityanikov family. Well, um, there's no information about this Verityanikovs. What we know is that Mr. Verityanikov was an army an army man. And after he retired, he took a loan from a bank. And obviously, it doesn't mean that everyone could afford building a house. No, obviously, they had to take a loan, and not everyone would be given a loan. But Verechenikov clearly was given a loan, and he built this tenant house. And um, in 1911. One of the apartments was rented not by but for Grigory Rasputin. So that's why I thought it would be quite an interesting thing to talk about. You see the photo. This is one of the parties, dinners in the Rasputin. You see Rasputin is surrounded with the women. You know that women were absolutely fascinated, mesmerized, maybe even literally by Rasputin. And by the way, here in this photo, you see a woman who she's sitting with her, like she's in the middle of the frame, and she's wearing kind of a sailor's uniform in a way. It looks like it's a just a scarf, but it looks a bit like that. So this is Maria Rasputin, the daughter of Grigory. So it's one of those parties, one of those gatherings. And Rasputin never really paid for his dwellings. He would be paid for, everything would be paid for him by Anna Verbova, but also Anna Verbova was sponsored by the Romanovs, obviously. So it's one of the addresses of Grigory Rasputin in the city. Not the last one. Speaking of the last dwelling of Rasputin, we know it very well because there is a museum, the unofficial private museum in St. Petersburg, and we visited it about a year ago, and maybe a year and a half. So yeah, it's just one of the places to put on the map related to Rasputin. So, and by the way, we know exactly the apartment where he lived is in the central section of the building. The uh, uh, the uh, the the fifth floor. Well, I'll show it to you, or maybe it's the fourth floor, depending how you count it. The building itself, I would say it looks quite average. Again, there's no information about the Veritenikov family. It was registered to the name of Veritenikova, so the wife of the general. That was a very common practice. So this is the floor where Rasputin rented an apartment. And if you remember, the higher the floor, the cheaper the rent was because these buildings did not have a these buildings didn't have an elevator. And I'm not sure, well, as you know, and we spoke about it, some of the 19th century buildings now were actually now have an elevator. They were built in the already mostly in the Soviet times, but some buildings still don't have an elevator because there is nowhere you can actually put it. Sometimes the elevators are attached from the outside of the building if there is a place, if it can be done like from the engineering point of view, but in some cases it cannot be done. So you can still find the buildings in St. Petersburg that don't have an elevator. And obviously they are cheaper to rent, they're cheaper to buy, but still not too cheap. Yeah, we're now passing by the Pample House. Well, lovely looking, recently restored. I wish I had more photographs, but I don't. There is not really much information about the Pamples. We know that the Pamples left when the First World War broke out because they were actually Germans, and the German businesses and people with German last names, they didn't feel comfortable in the city because of this big campaign or targeting Germans in connection with the First World War. Well, another opulent house on our way. It originally another building used to be located in this plot of land, which was definitely way more modest. I like that window in the middle of the wall. There was supposed to be actually this is an illegal window because that's a Brandmauer, a very thick wall that was supposed well that had to be there um, because of the fire safety, right? So the thick brick walls were supposed, well, were believed, to protect the other buildings from the conflagration, and they weren't supposed to be any windows at all. But someone clearly broke the rule. But in the end of the 19th century, that building was torn down, and this amazing Art Nouveau mansion. I call it a palace, but technically speaking, it's more of a palace. I don't know. Gorgeous building was constructed. It was constructed to commission of Giza von Vanderpals, who was a a Dutch businessman and an ambassador of the Netherlands in St. Petersburg and in the Russian Empire. He lived here with his family. Yes, that's an interesting story. So Genrikh van der Pals. That's his name. That's he. There are some photographs even of his children. He had a big family, and some of well, with his daughter married a son of a Russian businessman, and the two families really got along, and the descendants of Van der Pals. are still living in St. Petersburg, but not in these buildings. So these buildings are not residential ones. Um, in this building right now is housed the Военкомат, that's kind of a military commission, and it's one of the central offices, so to speak. Yeah, kind of central military committee that's in charge of the conscriptions and everything. So yeah, yeah. But let's speak about a more fun part. That is the life of Giza von van der Pijs in this house. Gorgeous. I have photographs. I have never been inside, and not like I really want to go to this building. But I know that a couple of times a year, when the days mm, of the kind of cultural heritage were celebrated in the country, there was this campaign. It used to be, at least. I'm not sure about nowadays, but at least when I lived in Moscow, in like 2015, 2016, 2013, there was this National Heritage Day celebrated, and during one week, uh, like if you were lucky enough, you could visit a lot of, I would say, quite inaccessible houses in Moscow and St. Petersburg, mainly embassies, because yeah, normally embassies are housed in opulent 19th century merchant houses, and as a rule, you cannot access these buildings. But well, so I found some photos online. Again, I have never been inside. I wish, I wish I could, but also maybe I should. Maybe I don't want to go there. I don't know. But look at this. I mean, look at this staircase. Look at this dragon. What an amazing staircase. What an amazing fireplace. Just incredible. It's one of that's one of the drawing rooms on the upper floor. Well, I have never seen doors like this. I have never seen the decorations like this. Really honorable. It's one of the splendid Art Nouveau examples, and it's such a shame that it's not open to public. It's such a shame that the Art Nouveau Furniture Museum is not housed in this building, because I think an Art Nouveau Furniture Museum should be. I did a tour about the Art Nouveau furniture uh, several months ago. I think the Art Nouveau Furniture Museum should be moved here. That's what I think. I think it's a good idea. Everything has been preserved. The house is in the absolutely impeccable condition, quite recently restored as well. But it was also very well upkept during the Soviet period, because this is the same story that the military committee moved in the Soviet period and remained up until nowadays. The Moorish room, you know that every fully fledged 19th century house had to have a Moorish room. In most cases, it was the room for smoking. Another photograph of the Moorish room. I mean, check out the doors as well. Oh, wow. And for Van der Pal often visited, often traveled around the world. He was also frequent in the Netherlands. Obviously, he will be going back and forth, but the very big part of his life he spent in St. Petersburg. And there was obviously community of Dutchmen. There was a very big community, because alongside with the English, there was also a lot of Dutchmen that originally came during times of Peter the Great. I love the stained glass. That's the stained glass on one of the balconies. Originally, the Dutchmen came with Peter the Great, whom he hired to work in the city to help him build ships and everything. And then some would stay, and more people would be coming in the 19th century as well. So There was a big community. And this is already the photos of the courtyard. There were a lot of service buildings. There were a lot of where the servants lived. That he also had a garage. He had a car. He had a garden. So you kind of have an idea. So you technically you can walk through the gates, but you cannot because it's not a museum. But everything has been preserved as it was, which is incredible. Have also found this photo of the living room, drawing room. Let me go back a little bit. There you go. And also some more photos of Giza von der Pais and his wife and one of the daughters. This is one of the earlier photographs. Yes. And I think we're just going to talk about maybe one more building, and then we need to get ready for another tour for Fyodor Dostoevsky, which starts in 10 minutes from now. And well, the buildings we're going to see here, actually the three of them, the three consecutive buildings, they look very different. However, they all belong to one and the same person, to George Bormann. George Bormann. He was a descendant of Ger of Germans that moved to St. Petersburg again during times of Peter the Great. So you can see that this is a very cosmopolitan, a very international city and the street. So George Bormann was a descendant of those Germans from the 18th century, but we're talking 19th century here. George Bormann opened a big confectionery, big factory. He produced some of the best sweets, some of the best chocolate in the empire. And he started as a small chocolate shop in St. Petersburg with a very little workshop where every chocolate was made by himself. And then it grew into a big factory. So the territory that belonged to him, that's the territory of the three houses, and it goes deeper into the block. He built also an income house here. Well, the yellow building was an income house. That was the building of the office. It's also where he lived himself. Well, it was very convenient. So you live where you work. And if you go inside into the archway, so there were also the workshops where the chocolate was made, where all the sweets were made. Again, of course, it was also handmade. The toffees, the candy, the hard candies, and there is a chocolate factory even nowadays, but it's not named after Bormann anymore. It's named after Samoilova, and well, there are a lot of memoirs, people sharing that street always smelled fantastic. There was a sweet scent of chocolate filling every corner of the street and every apartment. I wouldn't mind that, you know? I wouldn't mind that. And it's still, you can still smell the chocolate because of that chocolate factory located there. But obviously, the chocolate that George Bormann used to make. These are the photos taken before the revolution, exactly in his factory. So all the chocolates, they were wrapped obviously manually. It was all just the manual work, handmade, handcrafted chocolate, but he supplied chocolate to the entire empire. He wasn't the only chocolate king, but his chocolate was one of the best. And also his marketing campaigns were interesting. He created, he was in a way compared to Carl Fabergé in the world of chocolate because of the different because the wrappings for the chocolate sweets, he made them collectibles. He shared stories on the chocolate wrappings, and kids wanted to have more, and parents had to buy more of this chocolate so they could also read the comic stories. And also he shared the story of well, some stories on the wrapping. So every wrapping was more than just a wrapping. It was actually the work of art. I think this is it for now because again I need to get ready. Misha needs to get it all prepared for his tour. So let's have a short Q&A, and then I will see you in 5-ish, 7-ish minutes from now on the next tour. And let me share with you the links just in case. So since if you joined later, um, it's likely that you actually don't have access to the previous messages. I'm not sure how it works, so I'm sharing here the links. Hold on a second. Let me know if you have any questions. So the avenue is quite long. We are definitely going to have several episodes on the avenue, and there are a lot more stories. Like in the next episode, we're going to talk about a love story between another ballerina and another Grand Duke, actually, Nicholas II. Well, but before he became an emperor. Nice to watch these beautiful places. I like your attention to details. Thank you, Dorley. Yes. Well, normally I don't remember if I have ever taken tourists on a walking tour to Kolomna. No, I don't think so. Because mainly this area is not that interesting. Well, I mean, it is interesting, but there are so many more areas you would normally take tourists to. So Kolomna was kind of always, we just passed by it on a cruise tour in most cases. So, and well, I so wish I could go there now and actually walk straight. It's 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 the place, that neighborhood is the place where the city hasn't changed at all. It also happens to be partly where Dostoevsky lived, and the next door in a couple of minutes from now is actually going to be about Fyodor Dostoevsky and his early works and his life and his biography. Thank you, Ronnie. You liked learning about the chocolate. There will be more, I promise. We will talk more about George Borman in the second episode. That's already scheduled. Margaret, thank you so much for joining me and thank you so much for your tips. Thank you, everyone. So I need to wrap this up as a chocolate wrapping, right? So I'm wrapping this up just to catch up with you in a couple of minutes in the world of Fyodor Dostoevsky. Thank you so much, Cindy. It is a lovely street and it's so St. Petersburg. It's so authentic. I'm a big fan of that area. I would gain too much weight just smelling the chocolate. That's one of the reasons didn't I wasn't that frequent in that area as well. It still smells lovely. That chocolate is not that good anymore, but it has the vibe, and I kind of like it that the lineage is still there. I mean, they're still making chocolate, so that's lovely. Okay, I need to go, and I will see you very soon. Maybe a couple minutes. Maybe I'll be late for a couple minutes because we need to get things set for the next tour. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. So happy New Year, and well, I will see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye bye.